This is the month 2 update on my Walstad Betta Fish tank setup, where I use regular topsoil as the nutrient layer for substrate and then I cap it with some fine gravel. I'm not using CO2, liquid fertilizers, root tabs or filters in this tank, and I'm trying to keep things as close to what people will expect with a Walstad tank as possible. So starting off with the fish, and I've finally been able to find a Betta fish that I like the look of and add it to the tank, and he was added on day 51 of the initial setup. I do think that waiting so long has been helpful because the plants are established and there's plenty of them in here now to help naturally filter any ammonia that the fish produces out of the water, and I haven't had any real issues with water parameters. The Betta fish seemed to settle into his new home straight away, and he loved playing amongst the stem plants in his tank. I've named him Khuli as he reminds me of a Khuli loach when he's wriggling around in his tank, and he does seem to do this a lot. Here's a little clip of him playing in the corner of his tank, and he's looking all cute, enjoying himself, and then he seems to realise the cherry shrimp are all watching, so he stops and acts all embarrassed. I've seen him interact with all of the plants in his tank now, and he does really seem to enjoy this Walstad setup because there's so much plants for him to play with. He does seem to prefer the stem plants for playing and wriggling around in, and he does use it as a tail rest from time to time or a napping spot. I have also seen him napping on the S Repens and the Eleocharis in the tank too, but this guy definitely loves naps in meal times. He is only a juvenile Betta fish, and the shop estimated that he's around 3 to 6 months old, so with any luck he will be with me in this tank for a long time yet. There was a minor problem with feeding this Betta because he is a little derpy and he just kind of stared at the food as it sank through the tank's water column, and then when it got low enough the shrimp just grabbed it and ran off with his food. Because of this I have started to hand feed him, and he has got the hang of things now and he'll happily come over and get the pellets from my hand. Once he knows that I am feeding him, he gets really excited and he'll even strike at my hands waiting for the food to be released. I just want to quickly say that I'm not withholding food, I'm just waiting for him to actually swallow the first pellet that I give him, because if I put more than one in the water he just lets them sink and then the shrimp eat it, or it just ends up amongst the plants and it might cause problems with water parameters. When it comes to feeding time, I usually give him fluval bug bites for his first meal of the day, and I randomise 4 to 6 pellets per day for his first meal, and that's what he'll get. For his second meal of the day, I give him NT Labs Nano Tropical, and he really seems to enjoy this one as well, and again I randomise 4 to 6 pellets per day, and that's what he'll eat. I like to use different foods with different primary ingredients just to mix things up. Fluval Bug Bites uses black soldier fly larvae for their primary ingredient, and NT Labs Nano Tropical uses fish meal. Over the coming weeks I will be starting to add some frozen foods to the tank as well to see how he reacts to them. Moving on to the inverts in the tank, and thankfully Khuli really doesn't seem to care about them in the slightest. He has had a couple of close looks at the zebra snail in the tank, and he's had a few looks at a couple of shrimp as well, but other than that he just leaves them to do their own thing without trying to eat them, even if they are stealing his food. I didn't see the zebra snail in this tank for over a week, and then a couple of days ago it just randomly reappeared again, so I'm guessing it's just been hiding in these stem plants at the rear of the tank or coming out at night or something like that, but it does seem fine and it is moving around. The shrimp really have put the work in and dealt with the algae buildup that I had last month, and it's pretty much clear of all algae now. I use this algae eating crew in pretty much every single one of my aquariums as well, and they do a really good job of dealing with the initial algae buildup in a tank as well as dealing with any future algae other than black-beard algae, so hopefully from now on there won't be algae issues in this setup. Because the shrimp have eaten all of the algae in this tank, I do target feed them every other day with small broken up pieces of a Hikari micro algae wafer, but other than that they're just left to do their own thing. The cherry shrimp have actually had babies in this tank this month as well, and I managed to count 7 of them in here at one point, but I'd guess that there's far more of them hiding amongst the plant cover. I did think that Khuli would try and eat them, but I have seen him swim past a couple of the baby shrimp a few times now, and he just doesn't seem to pay any attention to them. I'm not sure if they're just too small for him to see, or if he just genuinely doesn't care or even know what they are, but so far things are going good, but time will tell as the shrimp grow bigger and he's able to see them easier as he swims around the tank. Moving on to the plants in the tank, and I did make a couple of changes this month. The Limnophilia sessiliflora that was in the back left of the tank was becoming an absolute pain because it was growing so fast it needed a lot of maintenance, and it was just starting to dominate the tank and take over, so I removed it. I debuilt my 40-gallon guppy tank this month, and I've moved the Rotala orange juice from the 40-gallon tank across to this 8-gallon tank, and it's in the place of the Limnophilia, and so far it seems to be doing good. Rotala orange juice definitely has a slower growth pace than regular Rotala rotunda rotundifolia, but it is grown and I am seeing daily growth in the photos that I take, so I am happy. I also removed the Hygrophila polysperma from the back centre of the tank this month as it seemed to be having a number of issues and it wasn't really grown anymore. I re-skimmed Diana's book this month and I did notice that she mentions she has similar problems with Hygrophila polysperma in her own tank, so it might have been something to do with that, but I really don't know. Anyway, I had a ton of Rotala rotundifolia in my 40-gallon tank, so I basically just moved a lot of it over and replaced the Hygrophila in this tank with more Rotala to bush out that centre column at the back there. Everything seems to have gone fine as well because the Rotala has grown just like Rotala does with a pretty decent growth rate, so I'm happy with that. The Ludwigian Mini Super Red really didn't seem to enjoy being trimmed last month and it took a while for it to start growing again, but it's got its deep red colour now and it is starting to grow at a very slow pace. I also bulked out the Ludwigia Mini Super Red in this tank with some of it that was left over from the 40-gallon tank D-build as well, so there's more of it in there now. The Sterigani Repens has been grown, but its growth rate seems to be all over the place. Some of the Sterigani Repens seems to have a moderate growth rate while others are very, very slow, but I would guess that this is just due to the roots of the plants not having penetrated through all of the gravel and hit the soil yet, so hopefully in the future they'll all catch up. I have noticed that some of the leaves on the Sterigani Repens are starting to develop these small little holes in them, so I'm guessing there is definitely some nutrient issues with this plant in this specific tank setup, but I will be keeping an eye on that. The Eleocharis parvula in this tank seems to be doing well, and it's starting to bush out and give that little carpet effect in the foreground. Every site that I've checked has listed this plant as requiring CO2 for optimal growth, but I'm not using any CO2 injection in this tank and it does seem to be doing well. You can see that the majority of the roots of this plant are still grown through the gravel layer as well, so I want to see what happens when they actually hit the soil and get that nutrient hit. The Salvinia in this tank has definitely stepped up its growth rate since I added the Betta Fish, and I'm guessing this is due to the food going into the tank for the Betta and the Betta's waste providing nutrients for the Salvinia. I'd estimate that I'm removing enough of the Salvinia to leave a quarter of it every single week, and then it's usually about half covered by the following week. When it comes to the maintenance for the tank, I've really only been focusing on trimming the stem plants down when they get about 3/4 of the way to the surface. As I just mentioned, I am removing the excess Salvinia every week as well, but Salvinia is so much easier to remove than something like duckweed and it literally takes a couple of seconds. I did do one partial water change a couple of days back after I initially added Khuli to the tank, as I did notice a nitrite reading on my test kit, but other than that the water parameters seem safe and stable. The majority of the trimmings from the stem plants in this tank have been replanted in it to increase the number of stems in there for natural filtration so far. Moving forward I will probably change this because I am happy with the number of stems in this tank now, so any future trimmings will either be discarded of on the compost pile or they'll be moved over to the 40-gallon tank once it's rebuilt to help bulk out the plants in there. Just to quickly touch on the tank accessories that I'm using for this setup, I'm using a Hyga 957 light with the tank, which is a pretty budget friendly light considering its power output, and it definitely seems to be helping with plant growth. I'm using a Fluval T50 heater as I've had a number of problems with other tank heaters in the past, and this one I use in every single one of my tanks now actually, and I've never once had a problem with it, and it's effortlessly keeping the 26 degrees Celsius or 79 degrees Fahrenheit water temperature in this tank without issue. I have added a small air stone this month because I kept having problems with green algae forming on the surface of the tank and it really didn't look good. This does seem to be an issue with surface disturbance in the tank and the algae just being able to form rather than there being any nutrient imbalances or problems with the topsoil. I also have this Walstad shrimp jar that is far older than my Walstad Betta tank, and it's having the exact same problem months later into its build. This tank has barely any bioload because there's one horned neurite in there and a couple of shrimp, so it definitely just seems to be an issue with the surface of the tanks with this method being left still. There is a trade-off with adding the air stone because this will create gas exchange in the tank and it will remove any naturally occurring CO2 from the tank, or at least reduce it, but I'm really happy with how the plants are performing. There is some issues with the Sterigani Repens, but I don't think that's anything to do with CO2. So for now, I'm not worried about gas exchange. I don't have any hardscape in this tank as Diana Walstad recommends against it, or at least recommends that you limit it in her book. The idea behind this is that hardscape takes up space that could be used for plants and natural filtration, so for this tank I did just want to maximise the plants in here. Moving forward in the future, with a tank of this size being used for a single Betta fish, I honestly think hardscape would be fine, especially small rocks or small driftwood, because you can still pack these guys out with plenty of stem plants to keep things safe and stable. Anyway guys, thanks for watching and have a good day. Here's a minute of of B-roll of Khuli just swimming around in his tank or doing whatever he does when I'm not actually at the tank glass, and I've not actually seen this myself yet, so I really don't know what he's going to do.